3 days after my heart surgery, my family had visited for a combined total of maybe 40 minutes. Everyone had somewhere more important to be. On the 4th day, while I sat alone again, a nurse I'd barely spoken to walked in, closed the door a little more than usual, and handed me a folded piece of paper. "I think you're supposed to see this," she said. "I don't think they meant to leave it behind." It wasn't a get-well card, it was a plan. And I wasn't supposed to be conscious enough yet to read it. My name's Frank. 58 years old, a triple bypass that came on faster than anyone expected after a routine checkup turned into an emergency referral within the same week. My wife, Diane, and our 2 adult kids, Kevin and Lisa, were all there the morning of the surgery, appropriately worried, holding my hand right up until they wheeled me back. After that, things got strange in a way I couldn't fully explain at first. Diane visited the first evening for about 20 minutes, looking distracted, checking her phone more than usual. Kevin came by briefly the next morning, mentioned something vague about a work thing he had to handle, and left before I'd even finished my breakfast tray. I told myself this was normal. People have jobs, kids, lives that don't pause completely just because I was recovering in a hospital bed. I genuinely tried not to read anything into it. By day 3, with visits totaling maybe 40 minutes combined across 3 family members, even my surgeon mentioned, almost casually, that he hadn't seen much family presence during his rounds. I brushed it off out loud. Privately, it had started to genuinely bother me. The nurse who handed me that letter was named Patricia, a steady, no-nonsense woman who'd been managing my recovery care since day 1. She'd clearly noticed the same pattern I had, the kind of thing hospital staff see often enough to recognize immediately, even if they rarely say anything about it directly. On the morning of day 4, Kevin had stopped by again, this time for slightly longer, going through a folder of paperwork at the small table near my bed while I dozed in and out from medication. He left in a hurry when a phone call came in, taking most of the folder with him, but apparently missing one loose page that had slid onto the floor near the chair. Patricia found it during her next round, doing a routine check of the room. She told me later she almost just set it aside without reading it, the way you would with any stray piece of paper. What stopped her, she said, was seeing my name at the top, followed by a sentence that made her stop scanning and actually read. She didn't photocopy it. She didn't make a big production out of it. She just folded it, walked back into my room once I was more clearly awake, and said, "I think you're supposed to see this. I don't think they meant to leave it behind." The page was part of an email thread Kevin had printed out between himself and our family's longtime attorney, a man named Sorensen, who I'd personally hired 15 years earlier and trusted completely. The thread discussed drafting an emergency power of attorney, citing my weakened post-surgical condition as justification for moving quickly before I was, in Kevin's own words, lucid enough to push back on the timeline. Buried further down, in a separate paragraph, was a more specific concern. Kevin's contracting business had taken on serious debt over the past year, and the plan outlined accessing a portion of my retirement accounts as a bridge loan structured through this same power of attorney, with Diane listed as a secondary signer. I read that page maybe 4 times before the words actually settled into something I could process clearly. My own son had been actively building a plan with my own attorney to gain financial control over my accounts while I was recovering from heart surgery, not because I was incapacitated in any real medical sense, but because being recently incapacitated made the paperwork easier to push through with less resistance and fewer questions asked. Diane's name being listed as a secondary signer told me she at least knew about this, even if I genuinely didn't yet know how willingly she'd agreed to it. I asked Patricia, once I'd processed the page enough to speak clearly, whether I was considered medically competent to make decisions and phone calls She confirmed plainly that my chart showed full mental clarity, normal cognitive assessment scores, nothing remotely close to anything that would justify an emergency power of attorney being rushed through. I called Sorensen directly from the hospital phone. He was clearly uncomfortable the moment he heard my voice, which told me almost everything before I even explained why I was calling. I told him I'd seen the email thread, that I was fully competent, and that I was formally instructing him, as my attorney, to halt any power of attorney paperwork immediately, and to consider our working relationship under serious review going forward. I then called my own banker directly and placed a temporary hold flag on any new authorized signers being added to my retirement accounts, just as a precaution, while I sorted out exactly how far this had actually progressed. By the time Diane and Kevin walked in together that evening, together, notably for the first time since the surgery, I was sitting up, fully alert, with a folder of my own notes on the table beside me. Kevin started talking before he'd even fully sat down, something about just exploring options and not wanting to worry me while I was recovering. I let him get about 30 seconds into that explanation before I picked up the page Patricia had found and set it directly on the blanket in front of him. "You left this in my room 3 days ago," I said. "I've already spoken with Sorensen. There's no power of attorney happening, emergency or otherwise. If you need help with the business, Kevin, you ask me directly like an adult while I'm sitting right here, capable of having that conversation. You don't draft paperwork designed to go through faster because I'm sedated." Diane started to explain her side, something about feeling caught between us, not wanting to cause more stress during recovery. I told her calmly that I understood feeling caught in the middle, but that signing onto a plan specifically timed around my reduced ability to object wasn't really being caught in the middle. It was picking a side, quietly, and hoping I wouldn't notice until it was already finalized. I changed attorneys within the month. Kevin and I had a longer, harder, more honest conversation about his actual business troubles once I was home, and recovered enough to think clearly about real solutions instead of rushed paperwork. We eventually worked out a loan agreement together, properly documented, with terms we both understood and agreed to without any hospital bed involved. Diane and I are still working through what her willingness to go along with that plan actually meant about how she sees our marriage under pressure. That conversation isn't finished yet, honestly, and I'm not going to pretend it resolved neatly just because the financial part did. What I think about most, even now, isn't the paperwork itself. It's how easily that plan almost worked, simply because everyone assumed a man recovering from surgery would either not notice or not have the strength left to object. Patricia, a nurse who owed me absolutely nothing beyond basic professional courtesy, was the only person in that building who decided I deserved to know what was actually being planned around me. If this story got to you, the next chapter is even more unexpected. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it.